Hello everyone, welcome back to another Stitches and Scribbles video. My name is Erin and today we're going to do kind of an easy craft fair tutorial for something that you can make and sell at your own craft fairs. Today we're making these little cactuses using the knitting machine. So in order to make this project you are going to need a small size knitting machine. I am using the Addy brand, but the Centro one works well too. You're going to need small pots. You can use plastic ones. The ones I have are the normal clay ones that you would actually use for planting. You're going to need a green yarn to be your cactus base. You're going to need the color of your choice for the flower. You're going to need some sort of scissors, a crochet hook, a yarn needle, and any sort of tools you may use to get things unstuck from your knitting machine. And last but not least, you are going to need a glue gun to put it all together at the end. Oh, and you're also going to need something to stuff your cactus with. I am probably going to use some yarn ends. So let's go ahead and get started. You're going to start with your knitting machine in the circular knitting setting. Then you're going to go ahead and cast on your green yarn, and we're not using waste yarn for this. This is almost the same method used to make a reversible beanie on a knitting machine. Make sure that your counter is set to 0. We're going to cast on by weaving back and forth between those pins. Then put it into the yarn feeder, and you're going to do this at a fairly tight tension until you reach 35 rows. So in order to tension my yarn, I kind of hold it between my fingers and then hold the bottom of the machine so that I am both keeping it stable and starting the knitting process at the same time. The first row can be a little bit rough, but after that it usually evens itself out. Like that. And you're just going to keep going until you reach 35 rows. And in just a few minutes you should have 35 rows. There's my counter down there. So what you're going to do next is trim your yarn, but make sure you leave about 8 to 12 inches of a tail, maybe even a little more than that if this is new to you, and thread it into your yarn needle. Whoops, not like that. We don't want those loose ends like that. Into the yarn needle. Then you can pull it out of the yarn guide and swing that closed so it's out of the way. Now we're going to cast off of the knitting machine. So you're going to keep winding slowly, and then eventually you'll see those loops that don't have a new thread on them, and you're going to pick those up with your yarn needle all the way around. And I like to put my finger over the next one, at least for the first few stitches, so that I don't accidentally pull that one off before it's ready. So I just alternate between picking up stitches and releasing new ones. And then you can move your knitting machine, and you should have something that looks like this. So now what we're going to do is to pull on that string so that the top is tight, and just weave a few stitches back and forth across that opening. This is just to kind of keep all the ends in place. Then put your yarn needle down through the center so that it comes out the other side of your tube. I also at this point like to give the tube a little bit of a tug to kind of even out those stitches. Now you can pull off the yarn needle, and the other end that we started with should cinch if you pull on it, just like the one that we just did. Before you cinch it all the way though, pull the cast off end through halfway, kind of like that, and then cinch the cast on edge all the way around. Then you can tie your two yarn ends together. In a pretty firm knot. And you should have something that looks like a little tiny hat. You can snip those ends, leaving a little bit of a tail. We don't need to weave them in because we'll be flipping this inside out in just a second. Okay, I now have my yarn ends ready here to stuff, so I'm going to flip my little hat inside out so that the ends are underneath. And then before I stuff it, I'm going to take one of those yarn ends I cut. The other one you can add to your scrap yarn collection. And I'm going to thread my yarn needle again. This yarn happens to be splitting a lot when I'm trying to thread it. Then I'm going to pick up some stitches on the edge and kind of go over and under those ridges formed by the knit stitches, so that once I stuff this, I'll be able to cinch this end closed too. You could do this without doubling up the fabric like I did, but I find that the stuffing stays in better and is less visible if you double layer the green part of the cactus. Same thing with all like stuffed animals made using the knitting machine. I find that they look better if the pieces are doubled up. Okay. Once you go all the way around, your top should work kind of like a drawstring bag. So you can open it up, stuff in some yarn scraps, and you don't need to stuff this too much because we're going to be kind of stuffing part of it into the pot, so it does not need to be over stuffed. Get your yarn in there. Make sure none of the ends are poking out, and then you can pull your little drawstring closed and tie it in a knot. And trim the ends. And this is the end that's going to go down into our pot, so you don't really need to worry about weaving in those ends either. So if you hate weaving in ends, this is a pretty good project for you. Next, we're going to make our little crochet flower. So get your flower color. I'm going to scoot all of those ends out of the way. Get your flower color, and we're going to make a very simple crochet flower. So start with a slip knot and then chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to slip stitch back into that first chain that we did. And that chain 5 becomes your first petal. So we're going to do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip stitch into the first chain. That's 2 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip stitch. That's 3 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip stitch. That's 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip stitch, and that's your final petal. Trim off a little bit of yarn, enough that you have a little bit to work with. Pull through that last stitch. And then I like to take the yarn tail I just tied off, weave it back through the center of all of those petals so that it sticks in through the middle instead of off to the side. And then you can kind of tug on those yarn ends, to make sure the center of your flower is closed. Now you're going to thread one of those ends onto your yarn needle. Pick a spot on top of your little cactus, pull it through, and you're just going to tie a knot with those two yarn ends. Make sure you tie it pretty tight so that your flower isn't going anywhere. If you're worried about it though, you could always do a couple of stitches to keep everything in place. Now you've got a cactus with a little flower, and again, don't have to weave in the ends, just take your crochet hook, or you could do this with your yarn needle, and pull those ends through into the stuffing, out the other side, trim them pretty close, and squish your fabric around a little bit so that your ends are tucked neatly on the inside. Now comes the assembly part. I'm going to make sure that my glue gun is hot, and it looks like it's not yet, so I'm going to have to wait a few minutes. Alright, now we're back. I apologize if you hear some weird noises in the back as we're working too. I am filming in my basement today because of other stuff that's going on in my house, so you might hear some pipe noises in the background. I think the dishwasher is running. So now that my hot glue gun is ready, I can tell because it decided to leave a drip on my table. You're going to do a line of glue very roughly around the edge of your little flower pot. Doesn't have to be neat because we're not going to end up seeing it. Squish your cactus a little bit and shove it right in there. And that's it for your little cactus. If you want to use something other than hot glue, something like super glue or tacky glue would also work, but then it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. I like to start with hot glue, and then if I notice one coming out, I'll add a layer of tacky glue so that there's not too much buildup in there. These I would probably price around $15 just because the pots are a little bit more expensive when it comes to sourcing materials. Otherwise, both of the yarns I used were value yarns. This one's a Red Heart Super Saver, and this one, the pink one is Hobie Amigo XL, but Red Heart Super Saver has something very similar. I would say if you're also trying to cut down on supplies and you want some variation in color, you can use the Red Heart Ombre Stripes yarn because the stripes are pretty big, so you can get some different solid colored cactuses out of one skein. And if you want different colored flowers, I'd recommend any of the Red Heart stripes. I think the retro stripes would be really cool for this. And then you can get different colored flowers out of the same skein. And I think that's going to be it for this tutorial. If you make these, make sure to tag me on Instagram or other social media. I'd love to see your recreations. And if you're interested in following me anywhere else besides YouTube, that information should be in the description box below. Have a great craft fair season, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye everyone!